The following program is a production of WVIZ-TV Cleveland, making the difference for you.
I have distinct memories of climbing aboard a streetcar on Madison or on Detroit, and for 10 cents going downtown, which was a great deal in those days.
There used to be matinees at these theaters, 10 cents that only cost you. And you'd see a double feature, coming attractions, and a comic.
We really enjoyed Euclid Beach Park. And, of course, the candy kisses and the Humphrey popcorn balls. Humphrey's had, I don't know, a special way of making that stuff.
Well, the tree at Lindner's was just so tremendous because Sterling Lindner's, we used to go up to about the 4th or 5th floor and look down on it, and it was so impressive to our little kid. I mean, it was just unbelievable.
Still on the board. Thank you.
Every Friday for the past 13 years, Doris Belovich, Janine Seipols, Laverne Lentz, and Marianne Catholic have been meeting at the Tri-City Senior Center in Middleburg Heights. They play some bridge, they share a laugh, and they reminisce about the Cleveland of days gone by.
We could buy a double dip ice cream cone at Cookta's drugstore for a nickel. But if we wanted to really stretch it, we would get one dip for 3 cents, save the 2 cents, and then my dad would give us a penny so that in a couple of days we could get another cone, really. But steak was 3 pounds, round steak, 3 pounds for $1 at Kroger's, which was across the street from our barbershop. Bread at Sadowski Bakery was 3 cents a loaf. I remember that distinctly, homemade hot bread.
I remember at that time there were many, I suppose maybe now you'd call them bums, but they rode the rails. And very often for Sunday dinner, one of those men would be at our table. My mother, we didn't have that kind of food, but whatever was on our table, my mother and dad shared it with one of these people,
My father used to make wine and root beer and beer. And if he didn't do it right, you'd be eating in the kitchen and you'd hear pop in the basement because the bottles are exploding.
Every Sunday we would have to go visit our relatives on the east side, and we'd get all dressed up with our hats and our gloves and our little purses, and my mother and dad would take us all the way to the east side. Now that was hours. You'd have to take like 3 or 4 streetcars, and you had to get a transfer to go from one to the other. We'd go way out to Collinwood. Now that was pretty far.
Streetcars. Today you'd have to visit a museum like Trolleyville, USA in Olmsted Township to ride one. But back in the 1930s and 40s, they were the last word in transportation. The first electric streetcar hit the streets of Cleveland in 1889. And by the height of their popularity during the Second World War, most everyone was riding the rails of the old Cleveland transit system. As Clevelanders went about the routine tasks of their everyday lives, the old streetcars welcomed them with the kind of fine craftsmanship that is rare in today's age of fiberglass and plastic. Artisans at Cleveland's G.C. Coleman Car Company crafted the walls and handrails out of rich cherry wood. The streetcars featured bouncy rattan seats and fare boxes with a little stool nearby for the conductor. But collecting fares wasn't the conductor's only duty. Each conductor was also responsible for stoking the coal stove that heated the streetcar.
And my father tells a great story, one of his favorites. In as late as 1949, he had a gentleman visit from outside Cleveland who got off the train at the Pennsylvania station at East 55th and Euclid and took the streetcar from there down to the terminal where he worked. And the gentleman got off the elevator, and my dad was standing there, and he had kind of a startled look on his face, and my dad inquired as to why he was looking like this. He said, "Did that streetcar have a coal stove in 1949? All the other cities had gotten rid of these things years before, and the Cleveland transit system soldiered on with these old coal stoves, and they finally ran their last in 1951. My memories are mostly of the early 50s on Euclid Avenue when I would go down in Christmas time with my mother to Sterling Lindner Davis to see the big tree, and we would always take the streetcar. And to her, the tree was the big thing. To me, the streetcar ride was the big thing.
Blaine Hayes fell in love with trolleys as a boy, and the study of Cleveland's streetcar system is his life's passion. So I guess it's no coincidence that he works for the RTA. He recently published a book on the history of Cleveland's transit system.
There were things about the cars, there were aromas, there were sensations, there were sights about the old trolleys that are missing today in a aluminum fast-paced bus that rushes along a freeway. And it just takes away also the people thing of getting together with other people in the morning and having conversations, where in a private automobile, you miss that.
When you talk about streetcars in Cleveland, there's probably no topic that comes up more often than the subway on the second deck of the Detroit Superior Bridge. The last streetcar ran through that subway in 1954, and the tunnel has been sealed up ever since. But to this day, Greater Clevelanders fondly recall riding through those subterranean tunnels near Public Square on streetcars that are now just phantom ghosts.
And I have distinct memories of climbing aboard a streetcar on Madison or on Detroit or on Clifton, and for 10 cents going downtown, which was a great deal in those days. And I remember how those cars used to shake, rattle, and roll down the street. And when we got to the high-level bridge, we would look through the windows down at the Cuyahoga Valley, the Cuyahoga River, and just in my mind, I wondered, well, what on earth is holding this bridge up if I can see through down to the river?
Another thing that used to happen all the time was the high-level bridge subway had ramps that led down into the subway, and people would drive down in there constantly at night because they couldn't see. They didn't realize that it wasn't paved, and they would be driving on the ties and going up and down like this. So they were, the Cleveland Transit was constantly pulling with a crane. They would be constantly pulling cars out of the subway portals. So those were some of the things that happened in those days that were just part of everyday life in the 30s that it's lost today. You don't see it.
Another thing you just don't see today is kids catching a free ride. But it was a common sight back in the heydays of the Cleveland trolley system.
See, streetcars used to protrude in the back a little bit, something like a bumper. And then sometimes they'd have another coach where they could hook on. But when they have another, you could stand on that buckle there. We catch that streetcar and ride all the way as far as we could go.
Yes, kids used to have all kinds of adventures on the streetcars. A favorite experiment for many young boys was pulling the trolley line off the overhead cable to see exactly what would happen.
So to prove that indeed the trolley was actually powering this car, we had to pull the trolley off the wire. So I was running through Lakewood quite close to my home, and just started up, and a number of us got behind it and pulled the rope, and the trolley came off the wire, made all kinds of sparks. It scared the bejeevers out of us, and the car stopped. And therefore I knew for sure that that's where the power was coming from.
Streetcars were a fixture in every Cleveland neighborhood for the first half of the 20th century. So what led to the demise of the cheery yellow trolleys? One theory involves a decision made by a General Motors executive in 1925. The story goes that this executive wanted to find a way to boost automobile sales. And so General Motors bought up railway companies throughout the country, determined to dismantle the streetcar industry. But that's only part of the story.
There was also the factor of economics. The maintenance of the rails in the street, the overhead wires, was very expensive. Along came a bus which had no rails, which had no wire, no need for substations. It carried almost as many people. And instead of buying new streetcars and refurbishing the railway system, they just decided to go cheap and by the buses.
So in the early 1950s, one by one, the streetcars were replaced by modern buses. And on January 24th, 1954, Cleveland's last streetcar ran down Madison Avenue. And when it brought its passengers to their final destination on that cold winter night, it also brought with it the end of an era.
Well, we had a nice home on Washington Boulevard, a bungalow right near Cottage Grove, but in those days there was no such thing as natural gas heat, and we heated our home with coal. And I have a very clear memory of the coal delivery car frequently coming into our driveway on Washington Boulevard. We had an opening, a chute on the driveway in which the coal would be shoveled from the truck down the chute with a cloud of black smoke that was all over the place, and it would wind up in the basement of our home. We take it for granted now. All you do is to raise a thermostat in your home, and it's nice and warm and comfortable. But it wasn't that way. We didn't have any thermostats there. You couldn't control the heat by a thermostat. The only way you could control it was by shoveling some more coal on the fire and all the things that brought about. So that made it a pretty exciting experience. And frequently the same company which supplied coal in the wintertime supplied ice in the summertime. Very few, if any of us who lived in Cleveland Heights had refrigerators in those days, had electric refrigerators. We had ice boxes. The Iceman was a strong man who had tongs, and he had an ice pick. And he would go to each of his customers, find out whether the person wanted 25 pounds or 50 pounds or maybe even 75 pounds or 100 pounds. And then he'd go back to his ice truck. He'd take off the tarp which covered all the ice to keep it from melting in the summertime, and he'd take his pick, and he'd pick out the appropriate size of ice, put his tongs on it, and put it over his shoulder. He had a leather thing he wore on his shoulder because otherwise the ice would be darn heavy and cold on his shoulder. Put it on his shoulder, then he went up to the customer. It was at that point that I and a few of my other friends would always trail the ice truck around, because in the process of using that ice pick to cut off the piece of ice that he needed, he always left some slivers of ice there. And we'd love to grab a sliver of ice and to suck it. That was our popsicle without any flavoring, I guess you might say.
When we were all a good deal younger, Christmas time wasn't just a hectic few weeks of dashing from store to store to find the perfect gift for Aunt Flora, or racing the clock to get the holiday cards in the mail before the first of the year. Instead, through the dreamy innocence of a child's eyes, we saw the holiday season as an enchanted and magical time, a time filled with secret whispers, sweet anticipation, and joyful surprises wrapped in glittering silver and scarlet. And for most of us, the bustling excitement of Christmas time was capped by a traditional journey to downtown Cleveland to see the city decked out in her holiday finest.
I remember every year at Christmas time, we lived on the west side, and we used to take the rapid transit downtown, which at that time was called CTS, and we used to go over the Flats area and come through to downtown at the bottom of the terminal, and we'd walk up to the terminal to go Christmas shopping, and all the windows would have the little figures moving back and forth and going back and forth and everything. Always the last stop was Higbee's, because it had the Twigby shop where the little kids could go in, and they had a whole area we could shop by ourselves. They had a little door there where only small children go in and shop, and we'd go and get our presents wrapped, and we'd take them out, and our parents would never know what we had, and then we'd have like a secret for Christmas to take home.
Higbee's, I might say, used to have this little restaurant, the Silver Grill, on the 10th floor, and it was quite an event for the children to go down there, because they used to serve little chicken dinners in stoves.
When we wanted to marvel at a breathtaking Christmas tree, there was only one place to go, and that was the old Sterling Lindner store.
Well, the tree at Lindner's was just so tremendous because Sterling Lindner's, we used to go up to about the 4th or 5th floor and look down on it, and it was so impressive to our little kid. I mean, it was just unbelievable. And the huge ornaments that they had on it were special. They had great big balls and clowns and things like that.
And no downtown Christmas excursion was complete without taking the elevator up to the Winter Wonderland on Halley's 7th floor to pay a visit to Mr. Jingling.
He was a storyteller, and he would tell all these different stories to the little boys and girls, and he would be the key holder, and he would always have this key, this big ring of keys, and he would give it out. He would give the kids a key.
And each year the key was different, and what you could do is take it home and put it on your Christmas tree, and year to year you'd have these memories of going downtown.
Dan Burnett is the manager of the Penitentiary Glen Nature Center in the Lake County Metro Parks. For months now, he's been planning a special exhibit that will recreate the Christmas magic of Halley's 7th floor.
These window dolls greeted many, many people as they went downtown, and they saw their wonderful, fanciful, decorated holiday windows at Halley's. These windows were actually, they started to design them back in May, and it took them about 6 months to create these windows, and they debuted, they opened up the curtains the day after Thanksgiving. And many children, so that's what I remember, is going downtown and looking up at the window and just imagining what you're going to get for Christmas. The doorman's hat we have is actually from the doorman. His first name was Ernie, and it didn't matter what walk of life you were from, you would always be greeted with a smile by Ernie at Halley's. He would open up the door for you and welcome you to the holiday season. Christmas is what but memories. People used to flock downtown to see Halley's, and the Mr. Jingling character brought people there. And I believe that from the people that came to the exhibit last year, the outpouring of their emotions and their past memories and their stories, people like to keep the past alive. And that's what Christmas is. Christmas is made of memories, no matter how old you are.
I'm Mr. Jingling, how I tingling, keeper of the key. On Halley's 7th floor, we'll be looking for you to turn the key.
Well, I grew up in Berea, which was close to the airport, and the pilots would come a week before the air races, which lasted a week. So for 2 weeks, I was just in seventh heaven as these little guys would come buzzing over the house, and they're sounded like a bunch of hornets.
One of the neighbors worked down there. I was very young. And then he would take the children in the neighborhood. We'd get in his old car and go down there. And we didn't have to pay to get in because he took us where he worked. And it was just fascinating.
The National Air Races. Who can forget the excitement of this annual celebration of speed in the 1930s and 40s? For 1 week every September, we trekked out to the airport and enjoyed the thrills of the world's fastest motorsport. And even when we couldn't afford the price of admission, we still found a way to marvel at the skill and daring of the swashbuckling pilots and their magnificent flying machines.
My mother and dad would pile us in the car, 3 of us, but we didn't go in. We went to some of the bean fields on Engle Road, and we parked the car there, and then we would watch the air races.
When the stands were built in 1929, they were built to accommodate 100,000 people. However, not everyone had the money to come to the airport and be in the stands. And as the racers went over a large part of the west side of Cleveland, people would park in parks or on streets, and many people would rent out their front yards. They would charge a quarter or 50 cents. They also would sell soda pop and hot dogs. Many people rented their homes to the pilots and some of the other people that came here. I talked to a number of people that told me as a boy I had to sleep under the dining room table because my bedroom was rented out to someone.
But it was so incredibly exciting for a 10-year-old. I mean, you had, the cars were all boxy in those days, so streamlined trains and racing planes, that's where all the action was for a little boy. And it was just marvelous watching these things, and of course the photographs of the pilots, and they, suave, and they're out their helmets and all these things, and they were real heroic.
They posed by the plane, and Roscoe Turner had one of these caps, these leather caps that fit them. Remember that? Yeah. And he had this mustache that I swear was painted on. It was like, or oiled or something. It was a great big thing with handlebars on it, but very dashing, very dashing.
But Roscoe was different from most pilots in that he didn't want to be seen as the average barnstorming pilot. whereas most of them wore their World War I leather flying jackets and just about anything. Roscoe created a uniform for himself. He wore riding breeches, polished boots, a blue tunic, Sam Browning belt, and a cap, and he created his own wings studded with diamonds. So he was well known. The Gilmore Oil Company sponsored him, and he wanted to be even more noticeable, so he purchased this lion cub. Everyone said you couldn't tame a lion cub, but Roscoe in fact did. And he took the lion cub virtually everywhere he went when he was flying for records, including here at the races. And there are many chambermaids that will tell you that they didn't like what the lion did in the hotel rooms. Early on, Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals contacted Roscoe and said, Roscoe, you're up there in the air and you have that safety net of a parachute. Now this poor lion's riding in that airplane with you, and we think the lion should have a parachute. So Roscoe said, okay, we'll get the lion a parachute. And as the lion grew, obviously the parachute had to be renewed, and they made, I believe, 3 or 5 of them to suit the size of the lion.
Roscoe Turner worked hard to maintain his glamorous, dashing image, and he worked just as hard on breaking speed records. Turner is the only 3-time winner of the Thompson Trophy race, a race named for Cleveland's Thompson Products Company, which we know today as TRW. Jimmy Doolittle was another star of the Cleveland National Air Races. He was known not for a flamboyant personality, but for flying a very unusual plane called the GB.
It was called the GB because it was built by the Granville brothers. They had this unique idea of the shape of a falling drop of water being aerodynamically pure. It was tested in a wind tunnel. However, the airplane was not easy to fly. It was considered that only 3 men in this country at that time could successfully fly that airplane. Jimmy went on to win the Shell Speed Dash that year. He made quite a name for himself.
The National Air Races brought thrills and excitement into our lives. And just as important, they were a proving ground for American aviators, many of whom went on to help write a chapter in world history.
And these fellows built these airplanes, and they devised all kinds of things that were eventually used during the war. And many of these men went on to become test pilots and designers and help the war effort. Without the National Air Races, I seriously doubt if we would have had air supremacy in World War II as early as we did.
It was the biggest thing going in those days as far as aviation went. Yes, it was, and it put Cleveland right at the center of it. And it was great for Cleveland. Great for the country. Great for me. I loved it.
Hi, this is Bob Fairmont, School Hope.
Hi, Bob. This is Gene Carroll in Cleveland.
No. What do you say, Gene? How are things in my old hometown?
Well, that's what I'm calling you about. How'd you like to come back to Cleveland and be on a nice TV show that I'm producing for Landmark Farm Bureau Cooperatives? We're going to have some of your friends here and some surprises for you on TV.
No kidding. They got TV in Cleveland now?
Oh.
Do you remember where you were the day that television came to Cleveland? Think back to December 1947. That's when WVIZ-TV signed on as the first television station in Ohio. The first program we were able to watch here in Northeast Ohio was a live broadcast of the annual Cleveland Press Christmas Show with special guest Jimmy Stewart. And that was only the beginning. As the years went by, we began to spend a good deal of time in front of the television set, watching many programs that were produced right here in Cleveland. We enjoyed good conversation with Dorothy Fuldheim on her 1 o'clock club. We tapped our feet in time to the music on polka varieties. We got in shape with Paige Palmer. And we laughed along with our children at the antics of Captain Penny and his sidekick, Jungle Larry. But there was a time not so very long ago when entertainment meant more than settling down for the evening in front of the television set. In the days before TV, we used to hit the town when the sun went down to enjoy swinging music and big-name bands. Andy Anderson is an 85-year-old tenor saxophonist who grew up in Cleveland. and performed at many of the city's nightclubs in the 1930s. He remembers a time when Cleveland came alive after dark as we dressed up in our best clothes and headed downtown to where the action was.
You had dance halls, theaters, and radio shows, and nightclubs. Well, then you had big bands then traveling. So maybe Duke Ellington may be here tonight, you know, then maybe next week maybe have Fletcher Henderson.
Cleveland was a very large show town. We had clubs that we worked like Moe's Main Street. There was Corey's. There was the Bogart Club. There was the Cabin Club. And, of course, most people will remember Chin's Victory Room.
Ann Carroll worked as a dancer, singer, and MC at many of Cleveland's hot spots in the 1940s.
We had so many well-known people working these clubs, and I was lucky enough at a young age to work these places with a lot of well-known people. And then there was the World War II, where we had the Stage Door Canteen, and we had people like Artie Shaw, Dolores and Bob Hope come and perform, and they were so very gracious to us beginners in the business. The theaters, Palace Theater, you would go in at 8:30 in the morning, and you'd rehearse. Now, the bill consisted of maybe 20 acts, and there was maybe a 25-piece band. Well, each performer would take one musician, and at the same time, on the same stage, we all rehearsed. You closed your ears to whatever else anybody else was doing. And at 11:30, the theater opened, and you started your first show. You had a show for you did your live show for about an hour, and then they would have a movie. So you never could be away from the theater more than an hour, okay? So you worked from 11:30 in the morning till maybe midnight.
When performers got off work late at night and wanted a place to relax and unwind, they'd head over to Val's to hear jazz great Art Tatum work his magic on the piano. Val's was a tiny club tucked away behind two storefronts at East 86th and Cedar.
But Art liked it back there. And when Art's in town, everybody in town would come and hear him. And word get around, and the people in the theater, if they're on, I don't care what show, it's a Hannah Theater, Hippodrome, Art's in town, let's go with Val's, okay. And you couldn't get in Val's. People would be lined up all over to hear him play.
Another popular gathering place was the Short Vincent, an alley off of East 9th Street downtown that was lined with restaurants and clubs.
I never worked that area because you had to mix. Mixing was sitting with customers and drinking. And my parents were so opposed to me performing, going into a club performing, so I kind of stayed away from stuff like that. But it was, Short Vincent was alive. Come 7 o'clock at night, it was alive until clubs closed at 2:30 in the morning.
Short Vincent was perhaps best known as the home of the Roxy, one of the leading burlesque houses in the nation.
The Roxy produced many of the leading people in movies today and years ago, such as Bob Hope, the Burns and Allen, Three Stooges. All of them started with burlesque. And I feel burlesque was an asset to Cleveland because it drew the people.
Yes, live entertainment for every taste abounded here in Cleveland not so very long ago. And we didn't have to go to a nightclub to catch a live act. Many times we were treated to vaudeville shows, comics, or dancers when we went to one of the grand old movie houses, like the Palace, Keith's 105th, the Hippodrome, and many others.
I remember going down to the Palace and seeing Gene Krupa in a live band, right, a vaudeville right on the stage. And but they had great big staircases that went up and very ornate, beautiful. Great big huge chandeliers in the middle, just like the old Palace, the old State Theater,
The downtown theaters were lavish temples of cinema. But when we were kids, the place to be on a Saturday afternoon was the neighborhood movie house.
The matinee on Saturday was a big attraction for young people. It may have only cost a dime at the time, but every week we'd come. And one of the things that brought us back was not only the feature movie, but there's a serial. And the serial would go on week after week after week, and invariably had a way of ending with the hero or the heroine in a very critical situation. Either they're about to be pushed off a running train in the middle of, or run over by a train or whatever, and then so you want to come back the following week. And then during the intermission, after the main feature was over, there would be projections on the screen of various songs, and there'd be a bouncing ball that accompanied the lyrics of it. The audience would know exactly how to sing the song, whether it's Home on the Range or I've been working on the railroad. So those of us who didn't know the exact spot could just follow the bouncing ball on the screen. So going to the movies on a Saturday was quite an event.
And of course, you had your dish night at that time, where they give away dishes, and they gave away money.
My parents would go and they'd get like combs and brushes and dishes and everything. I remember the time my father went and won a live turkey. He came home and he took it into the basement to kill it, and the head, it was running around without the head, and blood. Oh, all right. The kids are screaming. We used to, in high school, we'd, if you had higher grades, they'd let you out to go to the neighborhoods, and you'd collect their iron, tin cans,
yes,
all
aluminum.
Yeah, and I remember I said to my mother, somebody put in a new fry pan, one of those iron ones. I said, I was tempted to take it.
Oh, the war. Well, we had the rationing.
We used to paint our legs, remember? Because we couldn't get stuck.
Yes,
right. This makeup would drip down your leg.
You couldn't cross your legs because it was tired.
People didn't have cameras the way they have now, and so you waited until the photographer came through the neighborhood, usually with a pony.
Yes.
Remember that?
Yes.
He'd take pictures.
Yes.
Well, he came through our neighborhood, and I had the mumps. But Mother said, it's now or never, so I had my picture taken with mumps. But we did have a photograph, because that happened like once a year.
Yes. Right.
That brings back memories.
We're here to offer you some nice music for dancing, for singing along, and having a really nice time together this afternoon. We start off with Glenn Miller's Serenade in Blue.
I find it very pleasant to come out here to Tri-Center and dance with all these wonderful people. And of course, it's pretty tough when you have a 20-year-old mind locked up in an 80-year-old body. But these people are very gracious people, and they're very good dancers, and it brings back many memories of our past. We pretty much all experienced the same things, the same kind of dancing in the 40s and sometimes in the 30s.
We sure did a lot of dancing. You danced every dance. And never too tired to get up and go to work the next day.
We had Dance Land up on Euclid, which was great. We had the Trinon Ballroom, which was great. Well, the Trinon was done very pretty. It had elevated sections there for the seating and for the drinks you could provide and so forth. And you could look down on the dancers. It was very pretty. It was a large ballroom.
Euclid Beach was one of the most prevalent and prominent dance halls at that time, and I'm sure almost everyone here at Tri-Center remembers Euclid Beach dance floor, because it was one of the finest dance floors in the entire nation, believe that or not. And the floor, when it was refinished, it was absolutely flat, and it was well preserved. They polished it and they waxed it, and I can kid you not, if you didn't have good balance, you were going to fall on that floor. They even cautioned you about that. but it was a very, very beautiful dance floor, and when it was torn down, it just broke everybody's heart. Aragon was another wonderful, wonderful dance area where everybody could meet someone for their style of dancing, and you could always have a good time. And the dress code was enforced very strictly. You had to have a dress jacket, and you must behave yourself in a gentlemanly fashion, or they just take you out of there. That's all there was to it. There was no two ways down the street.
In fact, you couldn't go in and had ties as an extra at the Aragon if you didn't have a tie when you came in.
And would you believe we danced to Lawrence Welk when he was just an unknown? And also Pat Boone was there. They were both unknown. Of course, my two girlfriends, they would never miss Lawrence Welk. Of course, at that time, the music was just super.
We all got dressed up in long dresses and high-heeled shoes, and well, we just had a ball.
I used to live 5 houses away from it, and I'd sit on the porch and in the summertime, and the ladies would come down the street wearing their formals, and I used to look forward to becoming old. And then in the summertime, they didn't have air conditioning back then, and my father made my brother and me each a pair of stilts, and there was an alley behind the Aragon, and we used to stand there and peer in, and the heat would just be overpowering, all the cologne coming at you. And then I remember one time the custodian kicked me out because I snuck in with roller skates.
I remember going to the Aragon when I was single. They didn't serve alcoholic beverages, especially on Sunday. They didn't even serve beer. They would have snacks, they would have drinks, and they would have dancing. You would dance the evening. It would be like maybe 8 until 11. And then after that, people would go out and have coffee. If you had a date, then your date continued. But it was nice because you didn't have to have a partner. You could go with a group of girls, or the guys would. Matter of fact, that's how I met my husband. I was at a dance in 1948. The skirts were down to here, okay? And I was wearing a red crepe dress, and it rained. And of course the skirt went all the way up to here, and I was standing hoping that it would dry. And I'm standing behind other women, so that nobody would ask me to dance, and my husband pointed me out and said, "Would you like to dance?"
We danced every dance, and usually we came there by streetcar, and I also had to go home by streetcar. And sometime we missed the last streetcar, and then we had to walk home for 2 miles. We weren't afraid to walk home those 2 miles years ago. It'd be like 1 o'clock in the morning, and thought nothing of walking those 2 miles. We didn't have a lot of money. We didn't make a lot of money, but it was a wonderful time. I wouldn't have missed those times for anything.
My grandmother lived in Toledo, so I'd go up there and stay with her, maybe during the summer. If I wanted to stay any longer, I would. Didn't make any difference, so I'd get on my bicycle and ride down to 9th Street and catch the boat, and it would leave at 8:30. And I'd go to Toledo, stop and put Cedar Point, 10 o'clock, about 12:30, and then to go to Putin Bay, get there about 2, leave about 4. Then go on in Toledo and dock at 8:30 that night. I get off my bicycle, ride to my grandmother's house and stay.
I had one trip. It was on one of the old DNC boats, and it was an overnight, 2 nights on the boat. When we left here at Cleveland, we got on it in the evening and left here at 11 o'clock. We got off at Detroit in the morning, and we had breakfast before we left the boat. We had lunch at the Dearborn Inn. We had dinner at the Book Cadillac Hotel. We went sightseeing at Greenfield Village and Belle Isle, and I don't know what else. And got back on the boat that night, came back the next morning, had breakfast the next morning. was $11.75 for the whole thing. It was unbelievable. I just love the boats, and I wish to goodness that somebody would bring one back.
What is it? Is it a girls' show? No, though it presents artistically, to be sure, 500 of the most glamorous aquafemmes on which the eyes have ever feasted. Is it a water show? No, though it stars Johnny Tarzan Weissmuller, Eleanor Holm, and 100, count 'em, 100 beautiful aquabelles. What is it? It's Billy Rose's Aquacade, the newest thing in American entertainment. He'll tell your grandchildren about it someday.
Do these words ring a bell? Well, they should, if you were one of the tens of thousands of lucky Clevelanders who visited the Great Lakes Exposition of 1936 and 1937. The colorful description you just heard comes straight from an advertisement for Billy Rose's Aquacade. This star-studded water extravaganza was billed as a touch of Broadway on Lake Erie, and rightfully so, since it was put together by Broadway producer Billy Rose. So who were the glamorous aquabelles who wowed us with their water stunts? Well, one of them was a high school kid from Lakewood. Her name is Jane Thies.
We started out trying out at the Lakewood High School pool, you know. I didn't even know how to dive in the water. But I just wanted to do it, and I did it. We had a little dance routine we did on the stage, and then we would walk down in fours and go into the water and start doing all the designs. The whole stage moved back, see, and at the start of the show, it would be close up to where the people are sitting, and then it would move back, and we would just have that big space there to do the show. And it was the lake, and it was choppy sometimes. One night it was really choppy, and in fact, some of the men came out, the directors and so forth. They were worried about some of us, because it was pretty hard to swim. But we did it. The water was more or less closed off where the bandstand was on one end, and they would throw barrels and barrels of chlorine. Of course, it was nice, but it was just a drop in the bucket. We used to go in groups, and we'd go over to the streets of the world and have some grapefruit wine sometimes. It was a wonderful time. It was like magic for me, It was like you're going to Hollywood,
Billy Rose's Aquacade was a big hit. And after the Great Lakes Exposition closed in 1937, the term Aquacade, which Rose had coined to mean water show, was even added to the dictionary.
But it was a wonderful experience, and I'm glad I did it. And I think about it a lot.
The sound of calliope music drifting through the air, the smell of fresh popcorn, the thrill of flying down that first big hill on the roller coaster. Remember when the perfect summer day consisted of hopping on the neighborhood streetcar and heading off to the amusement park?
Purita Springs Park brings a lot of memories. One of the things about that famous roller coaster was that one part of the coaster went down into the valley. And at night, when you took that ride, I don't think there's another ride anyplace, that it's just like falling into an empty pit and you can't see the bottom. And I'll tell you, there's nothing scarier than that. So that was a good place to take a date, because you always had her undivided attention after that.
Purita Springs Park overlooked the Rocky River Valley on the west side of town and was perhaps best known for its Cyclone roller coaster. The Cyclone was the highest and fastest coaster in Cleveland. Its death-defying drop into the valley wasn't for the faint of heart, but there were plenty of other tamer pleasures awaiting visitors to Purita Springs.
Sometimes on a Sunday, my father would buy a quarter Sunday pass
take me out to Pura Springs. Now, my parents were Depression people. I was born at the tail end, so money was still a little tight, and we'd get a quarter. And it was, what do I want to do with my quarter? I could ride the merry-go-round for a nickel, get a candy apple maybe for 15 cents, and then I still had a nickel for popcorn to go home.
Luna Park was another favorite destination for outings in the 1920s and 1930s. Sitting high on a hill out near East 110th Street, Luna Park boasted exotic architecture along with its water rides, Ferris wheels, and roller coasters. There was even a photographer there who would take your picture and turn it into a postcard to send to your friends. Yes, Cleveland was home to several fantastic amusement parks. But the granddaddy of them all has to be Euclid Beach Park. Although the park closed on September 28, 1969, its memory has been kept alive by a loyal group of enthusiasts who call themselves the Euclid Beach Park Nuts. Every year, the Nuts gather together to display their memorabilia and share stories about what made Euclid Beach so special.
I think part of it was the fact that it was on the lake, and you could watch the beautiful sunsets, the smells of the popcorn balls, and the vinegar smells of the kisses being made, and the people. I mean, it was a place where you could sit down and you could see people moving about, and people weren't concerned about where their children were because it was a safe place to be.
My favorite ride was the Thriller. The front seat, chugging up to the top with your arms up in the air and dropping over that first big hill and screaming all the way down. And if you could do that, you were a champion.
The ride I think I enjoyed the most was the flying turns, even though I worked on a racing coasters. But it gave you such a fantastic feeling of speed, even though it only traveled about 28 miles an hour. But being enclosed in the barrel really made you feel like you're doing about 90.
And of course the candy kisses and the Humphrey popcorn balls and the frozen custard, which to this day cannot be duplicated. Yes, Humphrey's had, I don't know, a special way of making that stuff. And everybody in their families would say, oh, look, we're going to get a frozen custard. And it was so inviting. It was so great just to think that they were going to get one of these ice cream cones with frozen custard in it.
It was a family affair because aunts and uncles and grandfathers and grandmothers could come out because they didn't pay anything. Now, what were they doing? Well, if Grandpa hated an amusement park, he could always go out on that wonderfully long pier and fish all day long. And if he brought his own bait, it didn't cost him a dime.
If there's one person who knows Euclid Beach Park better than anyone else, it's probably David Humphrey Scott. He's one of the founders of the Euclid Beach Park Nuts, and he literally grew up at Euclid Beach.
Well, my father was in charge of maintenance from the Humphrey operation 1901 until his death in 1938. I was very fortunate. I was born at the west end of the park, inside the confines, and I was a very spoiled childhood. I never bought a popcorn ball or a candy kiss, never paid to get on a ride either, so you know what a terrible childhood I had. There were about 40 families that lived in the park whose parents worked employees. And there were large families, so there were a lot of children. And we couldn't wait for you folks to go home because now we had the world's largest jungle gym. I'm riding roller coaster wagons and sleds down the flying turns, thinking nothing of it. We played hide and go seek and tag on these rides. I could cover the whole park. Never put my feet on the ground. My favorite food, of course, was popcorn. Although in the early years they did have candy kisses, and the hot dogs were wonderful. As I got older, their coffee was specially brewed. The beans were picked and roasted just to the way the Humphreys wanted them. They went to a lot of care for a lot of things. People would drive out of their way for a cup of coffee. As a matter of fact, one of the funny stories is that the coffee was always served in heavy mugs, and people would love to collect them. But they would come out to the park, and they'd get one of these heavy mugs. Coffee was a nickel. And they get one of these heavy mugs, and, oh, boy, I'd like to have that at home. And they'd pick it up, and they'd drink their coffee. Oh, this one's chipped. So, well, I'll buy a cup of coffee later. They'd go buy another cup of coffee later that afternoon and say, oh, this one's chipped too. So maybe they'd buy a third or fourth cup of coffee. Well, really the fact was that when the Humphreys bought these mugs, they always opened the cases upside down, and a man stood there with a hammer knocking chips in the bottom of each cup.
Like all of us, David Humphrey Scott has vivid memories of this lady, Laughing Sal, whose boisterous giggles greeted visitors at the main entrance to the Euclid Beach Funhouse.
Laughing Sal was put in, and the laugh track was purchased by the Humphrey Company, and the reason I make the point purchased is because we have heard from two different sources that the laugh track for Laughing Sal was produced by getting an opera singer stone drunk and then telling her dirty stories. Now, that's not a Humphrey operation, so I point out that they bought the laugh track. It was either a love-hate relationship. You either loved the laugh or you just absolutely were bored out of your gourd with it. I still feel terrible that it had to close. And I'll be honest with you, it took me over 10 years to learn how to drive down Lakeshore Boulevard. I used to actually drive out of my way to avoid it if I was in that area, because it was my home.
Even though Euclid Beach closed in 1969, which is like 27 years ago, people that went to it was such a unique place, just can't get the memories of the park out of their mind. I know I can't.
You felt like you belonged to a family, and it was safe, and you were secure. And your mother always knew where you were. If you were at Euclid Beach, you were safe. And you still feel safe when you think about Euclid Beach. It just becomes a part of you, no matter how old you get. I have brothers and sisters all across the United States, and they still feel Euclid Beach. You just feel it in your heart. It's still alive. It's never died. It's never closed. It's open.
Looking back on the good old days, we remember so many things that just aren't around anymore. And sometimes the things we miss most are not places or events, but feelings and attitudes.
We did a lot of things with our parents. Our parents were our role models.
Mealtime, you sat down, whether your husband came home at 4 o'clock or 10 o'clock, you sat down and waited for Dad to come home and have dinner, and you had good conversation, and he knew what the children did all day, and we knew what he did. It was different.
Well, we certainly knew our neighbors, because very few of us, even after we got up eligible for driving a car, had automobiles, so there wasn't that mobility, and second of all, we couldn't afford a car.
They were kinder times. People helped each other. Like, for instance, in my own neighborhood, I know very few people. I don't. People migrate, but they were stable communities in those days, and you knew everybody. Everybody knew everybody's business. I don't know if people would like that today, but anyway, that's the way it was then.
This program was a production of WVIZ-TV Cleveland, making the difference for you.